Welcome to Prophecy Countdown with author and pastor Kenneth Baer. Join us every week for the latest updates on what the Bible has to say about the events, the characters, and prophetic signs of the return of Jesus Christ and His coming kingdom. Make sure you not only subscribe, but like your favorite episodes and share it with your friends. Now, on with the broadcast.
Welcome back to Prophecy Countdown. I'm Pastor Ken, and on Sundays, we're walking through all 35 parables from my new book, Discovering the Mysteries in the Parables of Jesus. You know, one of the questions I get often asked is, how many parables are there? Well, the answer depends on how you count. Some parables are only a verse or two, like the parable of the hidden treasure and the pearl of great price. That's only 2 verses out of the Gospel of Matthew. I count them as 1, but many people count them as 2. Some stories, like Jesus talks about his Father's house, out of the Gospel of John, Jesus goes to prepare a place for us and is coming back for us. This is often not considered a parable, but it has many of the same elements of other parables. It's familiar imagery. It reveals deeper spiritual truths. So the best answer to is how many parables are there? There's probably somewhere between 50 and 60 of Jesus' parables. So today we're going to look at one of the most vivid parables in the Gospel of Luke. It's a parable about a feast, a banquet. Who doesn't like going to a banquet? And most importantly, it's an invitation. And here's the truth. All of us actually have received that invitation. And all of us will either accept, reject, or make some excuse. So let's begin by reading Luke chapter 14. These are the words of Jesus. These are the words in red. It's one of the reasons I love teaching the parables. Again, the parable of the great banquet, and I'm reading from Luke chapter 14, verses 16 through 24. Then he said to him, "A certain man gave a great supper and invited many, and sent his servant at supper time to say to those who were invited, 'Come, for all things are now ready.' But they all with one accord began to make excuses. The first said to him, 'I have bought a piece of ground and I must go and see it. I ask you to please be excused.' And another said, 'I have bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I am going to test them. I ask you to have me excused.' And another said, 'I have married a wife, and therefore I cannot come.' So that servant came and reported all these things to the master, and the master of the house, being angry, said to the servant, 'Go out quickly into the streets and the lanes of the city, and bring in here the poor, and the maimed, and the lame, and the blind.' And the servant said, 'Master, it is done as you have commanded, and still there is room.' For the master said to the servant, 'Then go out to the highways and hedges, and compel them to come in, that my house may be filled. For I say to you that none of those men who were invited shall taste my supper.'" So let's take a look at the context. Context is always key, especially when we're looking at parables, the setting and the time period. So Jesus gave this parable at a dinner hosted by a prominent Pharisee. You see, that's important because this was a room full of people who were influential. They thought that they were the in crowd. They would have assumed that they would have had a seat reserved at God's table. And just before this parable, one of the guests confidently declared, this is verse 15, "Blessed is he who shall eat bread in the kingdom of God." In other words, of course, we'll all be there. Jesus tells this parable to shatter their assumptions, because the kingdom of God isn't about entitlement, it's about the invitation. The master sends out the servant with a simple message: "Come, for all things are now ready." You see, there will be a time when that is exactly the message that is brought to the world. Come, for all things are now ready. That's the gospel truth right there. The work of salvation is finished. God has prepared the table. Nothing needs to be added. Nothing more is required, and no time is left. All that remains is to respond to the invitation. And here's the point. Everyone responds. Silence, my friends, is a response. Even delay is a response. But notice how the invited guests in this parable actually respond. They don't outright say no. They come up with an excuse. The first excuse is the field. I thought I bought a piece of ground and I need to go look at it. Really? Who buys a piece of land without first taking a look at the land that they're buying? See, this is a very thin excuse, and it represents the distractions, the possessions, material things that often keep us from God. Then there is the oxen excuse. I bought 5 yoke of oxen. I need to go test them, says this person. Well, again, who buys oxen? Who buys anything of value without first testing them first? And many scholars place this objection, this excuse, into the area of ambition, work, career, all kinds of busyness. All kinds of busyness of the life that help us say, no, Lord, not today, maybe tomorrow, but certainly not today. Finally, there's the marriage excuse. I just got married, so I can't come. Now, this one, many scholars remind us, at least has some cultural legitimacy. In the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 24, a married man was excused, a newly married man was excused from military duty for a period of 1 year. But this isn't military duty. There is no war. This is a banquet. Yet, let me repeat that legitimate obligations can become illegitimate excuses. Let me repeat that again. Legitimate obligations can become illegitimate excuses, even especially when they keep us from God. Do you see what Jesus is doing here in this parable? People don't reject God because they are necessarily wicked or intellectually they've decided against the offer that God is presenting. No, they are using excuses because often something seems a little bit more urgent or more important than what God is asking. The land, the auction, the marriage, these are perfectly normal things, but good things become wrong things when they keep us from the best thing. And there's a dramatic turn in the story. All of Jesus' parables often, well, not all, but most of his parables often have this turn. The master is angry, but he doesn't cancel the banquet. He widens the invitation. He says, go out into the streets and the alleys and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. And this would have shocked the Pharisees because they believed that the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame were that way because God intentionally had afflicted them because of some kind of sin. They were lesser individuals. But they do that. And of course, there's still room. So the master compels the servant. He says, go out again into the highways and hedges. Go outside the city and compel them to come in that my house may be filled. And it's this point that likely the Pharisees, those that are listening to this story, understand that Jesus is going beyond the chosen people and he's selecting the Gentiles. Now, in retrospect, that's exactly what we believe Jesus is doing here. He's widening the invitation to the Gentiles because he says it's God's invitation is spreading to the ends of the earth. So, my friends, remember, Jesus said that these parables reveal the mysteries of the kingdom of God. And there are a number of mysteries that are being revealed in this parable. First of all, the invitation came first to Israel. Remember, even Paul, the Apostle Paul said that. He goes and preaches first to the Jew and then to the Gentile. But notice what happened. The people that initially received the invitation, they rejected. That rejection, of course, opens the door for the Gentiles. And that's you and me. Most of us that are listening to this are Gentiles. And the banquet will be filled. That's Revelation chapter 7 gives us this vision. In Revelation chapter 7, verse 9, John sees this vision. He says, a great multitude from every nation, tribe, people, and tongue standing before the throne. This is confirmation that in the kingdom includes not just the Jew, but also the multitude of the Gentile. This parable presses a very personal question. And here's the question: have we responded to the invitation appropriately? Have possessions distracted us? Has ambition pulled us away? And remember, even good things like family, relationships, responsibilities, should not take place ahead of the things of God. And here's the bottom line. I love the bottom line. All of us respond to this invitation. Likely you've already had the opportunity to respond, and you're aware of that, especially if you're listening to this message. But here's the thing. Doing nothing is still a response. Making excuses is a response. But only one response gets us into the kingdom. And that response is, yes, Lord, I will come. For those of us that have already come to the table, the parable also gives us a mission. The master said, go out quickly, compel them to come in. And he's talking to his servants. And that's you and me. Go out quickly, compel them so that my house may be filled. This is the Great Commission in action. It's the Great Commission in parable form. We are the servants now, carrying the invitation of God's kingdom to those that need to hear about the Lord's invitation. My friends, the parable of the great banquet is about the greatest invitation anyone could ever receive. God has prepared the banquet. The table is set. The invitation is clear. The only thing left is our response. No more excuses.
What if the parables of Jesus were more than stories? What if they held hidden keys to the kingdom of God? In his new book, Discovering the Mysteries in the Parables of Jesus, pastor and best-selling author Kenneth Baer reveals the profound truths Jesus shared hidden in plain sight. Available now in paperback and Kindle on Amazon and other retailers. Get your copy today. Thank you for joining us on Prophecy Countdown with Pastor Ken Baer. Don't leave without first sharing the latest episode with your friends. Be sure to join us again for the latest updates on Prophecy Countdown.